Hi,
Hi, there you are. All
we
right.
did it.
Yay. Okay. So, maybe first you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I am a clinical psychologist. I specialize in health and I love to solve people's problems. I love fitness. I'm a mom, friend. I live here in Colorado Springs and I love everything related to helping people with their health.
Wonderful. Yay. And I love what you do because you don't necessarily rely on pharmaceuticals all the time. You have a really great open-minded outlook on using nutrition to kind of solve some of the mysteries and the issues.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, that's exactly what I like to do because it's pretty amazing to really think about the small changes and the little things that you can do with your lifestyle, your supplements, your nutrition to really make a huge impact. I know a lot of people who've been able to uh, change their mood, decrease anxiety just by making a small change. So I always like to tell people it only takes one small change to change everything.
Awesome. And yeah, I love that you are open to all of that, still being a medical doctor. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. I have a few questions for you today. So my first question is, um, I get with my clients that come to me for analysis all the time. They come to me because um, well, for instance, my medical doctor actually sends me his patients when he can't figure out what's wrong with them. And it's not that he's not smart, of course, he's an amazing doctor, but he says he deals with black and white. And when it's a gray issue, he sends them to me. That means their blood work has come out perfectly normal. And any of the other symptoms can't really be explained through his medical training. That's how he kind of puts it. So, what is your experience with physicians telling patients that symptoms aren't real or they're quote unquote all in their head, maybe?
Well, I love that question because I have seen it happen so often. Particularly, I think back to the year 2008. That was the time when fibromyalgia was common. Chronic pain syndromes were common. And I was in South Carolina at the time running a private practice that specialized in women. And I will tell you that fibromyalgia was what I saw the most because as a clinical psychologist, I was sort of the dead end person for that problem. When they couldn't
Mm,
figure out what it was, the patient usually got told something like, it's all in your head. I'm going to send you to this psychologist. And so the person would usually land in my office feeling completely helpless, hopeless, and I think that the worst thing that can be said to a patient is it's all in your head because it is it is invalidating and it is condescending, and I think it's actually a form of gaslighting if you think about it, because
mm,
I can't think of anything more narcissistic than saying to somebody, since I can't figure it out and I don't know what the issue is, it must be all in your head. And that's crazy making. And so it makes people feel like they're crazy. And I've seen a lot of that. I saw a lot of that then, and I think that a few other things that kind of fall under that vague gray, and like in the gray area of that
hmm.
umbrella, are Gulf War syndrome. Nowadays, we're seeing more breast implant illness. Those
Oh,
vague,
I've seen that. Yeah.
those really vague problems that, and we're not quite sure what it is. So it falls under that, in that gray area again. Chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity syndrome. And so when people are told that, I think what they're really being told is, I don't know what's wrong with you. I give up
Mm.
on you. And so they walk out dejected and hopeless. And at that point, they are depressed because we know that feeling helpless and hopeless is a recipe for depression. And that just makes
Right.
everything worse.
So they've gone to the physician and they're looking for hopefully an answer because, or maybe actually, in my experience, they've gone to multiple physicians and specialists. Like maybe the general practitioner can't answer it, so then they send them to the different specialists. And then when they get no answer, they that itself gives them, when they're saying, oh no, it must just be depression or all in your head, then that makes it even worse. So,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, it does. And I think another form of it's all in your head is the action that sometimes is taken where they're then just slapped with an antidepressant. And with women, that's usually an SSRI. And that may or may not be um, helpful. I mean, a lot of times they're not even evaluated by anybody that has any training in mental health. And so those are largely overused. I think that's one of the reasons that a quarter, so almost 25% of women between the ages of 20 and 60 are on anti-anxiety medications, and that was pre-COVID. We don't
Wow.
know what the numbers are now.
Well, it's kind of a shame that we don't know the numbers now because they're studying every other part of the data for COVID and why, this is a major health consequence from, the actions being taken for lockdown and all that stuff. So they should be studying it for sure.
Yeah,
It's a major
yeah,
issue.
it is a major issue. And so getting back to the it's all in your head comment, I just want to say that if you're falling in that gray area, there is a reason. It probably can be fixed. And if you keep going and you keep trying and you keep asking and finding different people, you'll find the answer. And it really usually does take one small change. Sometimes it can take one small change to make an enormous difference and fix everything. So
That's
stay
great. I love
hopeful.
that.
Don't ever take that answer, it's all in your head, as a dead end, because it's not.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Okay. My second question is, I noticed that you did a post just, I believe it was yesterday, which I loved, that said that alcohol sales have increased during COVID. And I have noticed that just with people I've known, like they're doing their a couple glasses of wine per night. Maybe it's increased to, instead of one or two, it's now three or four. My question is, how does drinking alcohol contribute to depression? Of course, we know it's a depressant, but like, I think people know that alcohol is a depressant, but they don't know exactly why it is a depressant and how even just a couple of drinks can start this cycle of depression. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. And you're right, alcohol sales have increased, they've skyrocketed. So online alcohol sales in March of 2020 skyrocketed by 243%. And in stores, alcohol sales increased 55%. So we weren't all getting together. There weren't parties. I mean, for the most part, we were isolating, we were quarantining, we were home alone. And what that tells me is that people were mostly self-medicating with alcohol.
Mm.
And so that's really not a good thing. I think we're going to see problems happening down the road. And to answer your question directly, how that creates depression, worsens existing depression, so many different things happen at once. So alcohol, we know that it creates gut permeability. So you're compromising your gut lining immediately. If you go into the physician's office and you get a shot, or your child falls down and scrapes your knee, what do? You want to cleanse the wound. You want to kill the bad bacteria. And when you put, rubbing alcohol, hopefully not straight up rubbing alcohol, but when you cleanse a wound and get a shot and they rub your arm with alcohol, they're killing the bacteria to protect you. And so think about that when you're swallowing alcohol. The same thing's happening to your gut lining. And so when you create this intestinal gut lining permeability over and over and over again, that wreaks havoc on the gut-brain axis, and you can develop all kinds of autoimmune problems. You're disturbing the gut microbiome, and I really think we've only scratched the surface on that with the gut microbiome. You're also increasing estrogen levels. You can decrease your testosterone levels, and both of those things alone, estrogen dominance and testosterone deficiency, those can cause mood problems too. You're taxing your liver. And then let's talk about the brain. So when we look at the brain, I think the Amen Clinic has done an amazing job really showing us and illustrating what happens with the brain when you...
Yes, I love the scans that he posts
Yes.
on his Instagram. It really shows you the difference between, you know, abusing alcohol or drugs, even marijuana. He puts them. I know that's probably not wildly popular for him, but is it Doc Amen
Yes.
on
Yes.
Instagram? Yeah, he's got
Great
some amazing
information.
scans. Yeah.
So
I'm
you
sorry,
can
again.
go. You can go look at that, and anybody watching can go see an actual picture of the brain, and how that looks in a person who drinks moderately only on the weekends. So we're not even talking about somebody who drinks every day. And then I have people who say, well, I just have a glass of wine per day. Well, what I would say to that is, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer about alcohol. I know everybody likes to have a drink every now and then. It's not going to kill you. But keep in mind that if you are having alcohol, there is a study that came out of Johns Hopkins that I thought was fascinating. And they looked at people who had an alcoholic drink 1 to 7 times per week. So that is 1 drink per day or less. It could be a person who has 1 drink per week. And what they found was that those people had smaller brains than those who had no alcohol. And so
Wow.
if the people who had 2 drinks per day, there was a dose dependent effect. So the more you drank, the smaller the brain was. And we know in depression, we see people who have shrinkage in the hypothalamus area of the brain. And so shrinking your brain is really not a good idea.
Right, because
Yeah.
what we want to do as we get older is preserve our brain neuroplasticity, and that's one of the markers, I believe, of neuroplasticity is how large is your brain. So when you're not using your brain, it is shrinking. So one of the things like this book that I just finished that hopefully will be out soon, I talk about increasing BDNF from sprinting. It actually is increased more during sprinting than during endurance training, which I thought was fascinating. But that BDNF and that neuroplasticity is what keeps our brain full and larger, so and happier, right? It's correlated to the happiness. And so that totally makes sense to me that the alcohol would even, gosh, that's kind of scary that even just 1 or 2 drinks, you know, if you're just having a couple of drinks on the weekend or that it has that much effect. But it's good that, yeah, not to, like you said, not to be a Debbie Downer, but it's good that everyone has this information because I think that the information is not getting circulated because it's not, you know, not what the media wants to tell you because
Right.
they're trying to sell alcohol,
It's and
the
it's so
companies.
socially acceptable. You know, people get together and have a great time with a few drinks. So I understand, and I'm glad that you mentioned BDNF. There have been some really interesting studies, and you've probably seen those that show lower levels of BDNF in patients with Alzheimer's disease and in
Mm-hmm.
eating disorders. And so you want to keep your brain in a place of growth, not shrinkage. And that comes back to lifestyle. So how often are you ingesting alcohol? What are you putting in?
Oh, freezing up there for a second. There you are.
Sorry. How
That's
often
okay.
are you exercising, and how much does your lifestyle really support a healthy brain?
Right. And what about dopamine and the dopamine and chemical balance that happens? So like the reason why we love to have that drink or something is because it's kind of like we put pause on whatever's going on and we get this rush of dopamine, which probably is what makes everybody feel like their inhibitions are gone. And then but from what I understand from that euphoric feeling, you also will have that crash afterwards. And then that kind of starts a cycle. Has that been your experience also clinically?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you see people who drink a lot of alcohol and then the next morning they feel blah, or you might have a moderate drinker who is just a little irritable the next day or has an edge. That's exactly what is happening. So when you ingest alcohol, you're creating an immediate increase in the neurotransmitters that help us feel happy and calm. But to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So think about a roller coaster. You're getting to new heights with every drink, and then the next morning you're going to come crashing down because what follows is a dip in your neurotransmitters, and that's why people kind of lose their spark. They don't feel so energetic the next day, to feel a little irritable. And in people who drink moderately every day, I've seen a lot of that. And so that when people drink too much, it's for a reason. They're self-medicating for a reason. And whatever the underlying problem is, it's usually a little worse later. Because emotionally and cognitively, they're also using that as a crutch. And so when you take the crutch away, you find that the person needs to form some new coping skills. And so then you have to work on that. So I think there's a spectrum here. And the more you drink, the more you're going to experience what we're talking about. And I meant to mention inflammation too.
Oh, yes.
Really triggers, maintains, worsens inflammation. And that's the last thing you need if you have injury or you're sick, you're fighting a virus. It hurts your immune system. You're suppressing your immune system with alcohol. We know that a lot of your immune system is in the gut. And so if you're altering the gut microbiome, you just want to keep that in mind, especially right now when we're dealing with this pandemic.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. 100%. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. You know what? Actually, I'm going to switch questions to the number 4 question I had, which was goes along with the depression subject and nutrition, and that is, what are your favorite nutrition or supplement? I'll say suggestions, but because everyone's different, maybe you can say what has worked in your experience before, so that we're not telling everybody the same recipe, because as we both know, everyone's individual and they all have different supplement needs. But like maybe your nutrition or supplement suggestions that help fight depression. So say maybe you, instead of reaching for a drink to cover up or self-medicate whatever is bothering you or your stress, what are some healthier ways that people can, and doesn't have to even be nutrition or supplement, it can be lifestyle or something like that, like that they could do maybe as a healthier way to minimize the depression?
I'm just going to jump straight to exercise, because I think that there is just such a close interrelationship between movement, exercise, training, and brain health. And I've believed that dating all the way back to graduate school, which is why I did my doctoral thesis on exercise and the treatment of depression. And it's because when people exercise, and a lot of the research goes back to the SMILE studies that were done by Blumenthal at Duke. And what they found was exercise, when compared with antidepressants, did just as good of a job in treating mild to moderate depression so exercise did just as well as antidepressants, but in the long run, there was a lower rate of recurrence of the mood problem. Since exercise does so many things that if you put it into a pill, it would be the most widely prescribed pill in the whole wide world. It increases your neurotransmitters. It does that fast. It makes you look better. It improves circulation. It decreases muscle tension that goes hand in hand with anxiety. So if you're grabbing the alcohol, if you're really relying on alcohol, I think that several things need to happen, but I would suggest exercise first. And I think that's super important right now, which is why it made zero sense to me that we would close gyms during the most stressful time in my lifetime and in our history that I've lived through. The last thing we needed to do was get people less active. So exercise is number one. If you do nothing else, if you change nothing else, make sure it's exercise. But you're the last person that needs to hear that. And I'm sure the people who follow you are active and care about their health. So they're probably already exercising. I would go from there to vitamin D3, because we know that the vast majority of people are highly deficient in vitamin D3. It's involved in the synthesis of serotonin. It is involved with the prevention of uptake of serotonin. And so if you're low in vitamin D, I really think it's like having a huge corporation with no COO. Right? So if you don't have vitamin D, which is really less of a vitamin, more of a neurohormone that does so many important things, it lowers your cancer risk.
I think most people don't realize that vitamin D is a pre-hormone. So
yes,
because we use the word vitamins for so many different things. They
Right.
think of it as just a pill or something like this, but it's actually a hormone, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And
And are
so,
you thinking exercise outside, but yet we're getting ready to, we're approaching winter. So, what do you think about, I know I've read that, middle part of the day for a shorter period of time is the best way to absorb the vitamin D, and that in the winter it's less absorbable. So, what are your suggestions for to mitigate that?
so I think it's always great to exercise outside if you can. I mean, here in Colorado Springs, I feel like we can be outside year round, but sometimes it's super cold, so anything is better than nothing. But I suggest that most people supplement with 5,000 milligrams per day. I mean, I use per day, especially during the winter. I take 7,000 I use in the winter, and the darker the skin, the more aware of vitamin D supplementation people should be, because it's harder to absorb or
Right, because of
download.
the melanin. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
There's some very interesting studies right now that are correlating altitude, living at altitude,
Mm.
with an overall higher level of vitamin D3 in the population, because they're looking at population, like in Colorado Springs, they did a study in Colorado Springs and compared that with a high altitude city in Peru. I think it's spelled CUSCO. So that high altitude area demonstrates lower numbers of hip fractures, lower levels of cancer, lower levels of depression, and we're not quite sure what it is about altitude. The hypothesis is maybe we're getting higher UVB concentration,
Mm.
so more
That
vitamin
makes
D3.
sense.
And
That
so
makes a lot of sense.
that might be an advantage of living at altitude. So that's also something to keep in mind. I think that second behind Colorado was Hawaii. So we're both living
Oh,
in good places.
yes, definitely. I am very fortunate to have sunshine all year round. And I often think that it's one of the pieces of the puzzle that helps me with my training and with running so strong is that I'm able to get, this sunshine every day. And I'm not, I don't bake in it all day long. Actually, um, only recently started wearing a zinc-based sunscreen. Other than that, I had not worn sunscreen for 10 years. And I go to the dermatologist every year to get checked just to make sure I'm fine and everything. And every year she tells me, you really don't have to come every year. You're fine. And I said, I know, but I like to practice what I preach. So, but my husband started making this really awesome zinc beeswax. Basically, everything is food grade. So what we put on our skin should not have chemicals, right? And sometimes I wear that if I'm running out on the beach doing like beach running and it's really a lot of sun. But otherwise, I really just manage my sun and I don't cover up. I think that people make the mistake of wearing too much sunscreen and they're getting the chemicals from the sunscreen, which, by the way, the FDA has said that only two ingredients in sunscreen are actually okay for humans to use, and yet they still allow all these sunscreens. Those two ingredients are zinc and titanium, and yet all these sunscreens have all these horrible chemicals. And so I'm really pretty anti sunscreen. I'd rather see people cover up if they need to, but if they don't need to, then definitely get some sun exposure.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I think we've overdone it on the sunscreen, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, it took the FDA a long time to recognize that. Sometimes it's actually hard to find sunscreens that are pure, that only contain one or two ingredients, those two
Uh,
ingredients.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm confused as to why they're still allowing them if they have done the studies themselves and came to that conclusion. So, but of course we know why money, the
Right.
money train. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
o- okay, so D3 and exercise. Anything else that? How about omega threes? Those are some of my favorites. What's your
That was
opinion on
my
omega three for depression?
For sure. Omega 3s are just so important. I don't think that you can really take too much. I take 4 to 6 grams per day. They do a great job at decreasing inflammation. Vitamin D3 and omega 3 deficiency together are associated with lower heart rate variability, too. So when you supplement with omega-3s, you're supporting better neurotransmission, lower inflammation, higher HRV or coherence rate, and that's important too. So I think people get confused though because they're not really sure how much to take and they don't feel the effects, so then they don't think it's important anymore. And so what I would say to that is make sure you are buying a cold water fish-based omega-3. I mean, you could even do cod liver oil that's infused with vitamin D3, and that would
I
be
think
great.
that's fantastic. Yeah.
And make sure that you're buying a good brand. I think the brand really matters because some of these are not really pure omega-3s. And so some studies actually show that in depression, if people take an omega-3 that's higher in EPA than DHA, it helps with the depression, whereas I think a higher DHA to EPA is good for anxiety. But whatever you do, make sure you're taking omega-3s because if you don't eat it, you're not getting it, and you're going to be very deficient in that. So,
And with all of the prevalence of vegetable oils being, we'll say, pushed on us, and seed oils, those are high in omega-6s. And then there's the omega-6 omega-3 ratio to think about too, right? We have to have that to balance out the omega-3. So I think a lot of people have too much omega-6, and then their omega-3 balance is way out of whack.
for sure. And then they're inflamed and not feeling great. And you can do a lot with omega-3s. I think it's a pretty magical supplement. So vitamin D3 and omega-3, those go hand in hand. And I think they work synergistically together too.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely wonderful. I think I agree with you too on the quantity of omega-3s that people are taking. In my experience, it's if they have maybe gone to a local, we'll say like Walmart or something like that, or grocery store, and they've purchased a low quality fish oil supplement that maybe has already gone rancid, and it has things like rice and yeast and all kinds of really strange things added to it for fillers. And so they're getting this, or even if it is just fish oil, usually it's not, but they're getting this low quality fish oil and they maybe just take one, which is not going to do anything for them. And then they give up on it, like you said. And I think that, our teacher, we have the same teacher, Charles Poliquin. He was an advocate of 40 grams of fish oil, especially if you were overweight, per day, which is quite a bit, or 1 gram of fish oil per percentage of body fat. So if most women, the average woman is 30% body fat. That's not the optimal body fat percentage, but the average. So that means you're taking 30 basically pills of the regular kind per day. And I think nobody would think, oh, I need 30 fish oil pills today. But Charles discovered this at an early time. I think it was like the early 80s. And he caught a lot of flack for it because people said, there's no science to back that up. There's no research to back that up. But what he loves to say is the research finally came out in the 2000s. And if he had waited all that time for the research to back him up, he would have missed all of those Olympics. So sometimes our experience, like your clinical experience, my experience with my athletes and with my clients, it tells the story. So I am definitely an advocate of high dosage of fish oil for sure.
Yeah.
And high quality. So I work with ATP Labs, of course, and they have a really great liquid fish oil that is faster and more efficient and gives you a higher dose than taking the pills. And it's tastes fine, tastes great. They have like green apple or lemonade or something like that. So I think it's not as hard as people think it is to get a good quality omega-3.
Yeah, I tried to buy that stuff the other day and they were out, so I know it must be
Oh
good.
no.
I'm gonna make some more, I'll buy it.
Okay, I'll pass
But
the word along.
yeah, and I agree with you on the high quality. I had somebody tell me once, well, I started taking the omega-3s and then I got cystic acne. And I said, well, what kind were you taking? And it turned out she went and bought something at Walmart and started taking it. We changed that really fast, but I thought, I wonder how much like pesticide and possible mercury we're ingesting in that. It's probably why
Exactly.
the acne was happening. But so yeah, high quality. And I love what you just said too about the high dose omega-3s and being 20 years ahead of the research. I think what he had to say back to that was so hilarious that it's worth listening to some of the old podcasts over again.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Charles Poliquin, definitely you've heard me talk. If you've listened to me, you're in the audience. You've heard me talk about him quite frequently. And Lisa also has some great experiences with him. What was the? I love the story you told about the ankle bracelet. Can you
Yeah.
tell us that story?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is we ended up moving here because Charles Poliquin introduced us to this area. He was having his grand opening at the Strength Sensei Training Center. And so I immediately got a ticket and flew out here from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is where we live then. And my husband was so sweet to get online and get the ticket immediately. And he got the arms day the next day. But we came out here and we were in the kitchen break room area, and I was wearing a biofeedback device, which I thought at the time was really cool because I was getting all this information about my sleep and HRV, and it was great. And so I wore it to the grand opening. And somebody asked us in the kitchen, "How do you guys know each other?" And he immediately said, "Oh, we have the same parole officer." And in that moment, I like looked, I looked down and I realized how much it actually looked like an ankle bracelet.
Oh
So
no. Well, if there
it
was
was great
something, if there was an event worth breaking house arrest, it would be his grand opening for sure.
for sure. It was a really great day. I felt completely underqualified to be there because the room was full of good athletes and
Oh no, you were right
amazing.
where you belonged.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Aw. Okay, I have one more, no, two more questions. Okay, I've heard your quote, which I love, and that is, "Health is your superpower, panic is your kryptonite." And I think that right now, during this time of uncertainty, people need to hear that more than ever. So, can you elaborate on how people can empower themselves during this time?
Absolutely. Um, you know, the at the beginning of this pandemic, the whole phrase was flatten the curve. And I was so alarmed because our nation, the whole world was gripped with panic. And so my thought was we need to flatten the panic curve. And the panic that we are experiencing and the chronic stress related, rather directly or indirectly, to this pandemic are going to cause a lot more problems down the road for a long time than the actual virus, in my opinion. Um, Panic and stress are probably two of the most dangerous things to your health. There's actually a study out of Johns Hopkins that was showing that chronic stress increases your chances of multiple autoimmune disorders by 2.6 times. So,
Wow.
so think about that. Stress immediately can compromise your gut health, your intestinal lining permeability, stress hormones. There was one study that showed that negative thinking can turn on 700 of the wrong genes, and positive
Mm.
thinking can turn on 1600 of the right genes. So when people say, "Oh, positive thinking is not realistic," well, the reality of positive thinking is that you're changing your health for the better. So
So it's a scientific chemical evidence of that.
yeah, absolutely. And so, what I like to tell people is that your stress hormones arrest your immune system too. And so, when people are extremely stressed out and they are arresting their own immune system, they're so much more likely to get sick, to have an accident, or to engage in behaviors that hurt their health, which is really why 95% of medical visits are stress related. We know that.
Wow.
95-ish, give or take a few percentage, but that's most of the medical visits. And so you have a pandemic and then you're panicking people on top of that. Well, you're putting them in a place where their immune systems will be compromised, so they're much more likely to catch something, whether it's coronavirus or the flu or whatever. And they're much more likely to go do things that are going to be maladaptive and hurt their health, like alcohol abuse, substance abuse, hurting
Junk food?
themselves, hurting other people. Yes, junk food. Um, so that is something to consider. And stress hormones are so effective in arresting your immune system that they're used with organ transplant patients after surgery to prevent their immune system from rejecting the organ.
Wow,
So
that's fascinating.
yeah, so just think about the damage that your stress hormones do In the immediate, it would help you run from a tiger, but as time goes on and your cortisol levels go up, there's a lot of damage that happens that you can't feel right then and that you might not know is happening, but down the road, you'll definitely pay the price for it. And so you want to mitigate the negative health effects of stress the best you can with all the things that we've talked about so far: exercise, D3, omega-3, any kind of movement that allows you to meditate. Meditation is a great one. I have trouble with the meditation because I don't like to sit still, but sometimes it helps me to get more active and do more intensive exercise to get my mind still, because you know, we as women, our brains tend to be very active. We're able to multitask about a lot of things at once. So if you need to speed up to kind of slow your brain down, just be aware of what helps you. And social support. And that was one of the biggest problems during the quarantine. People really we all need each other. We need community. We need our friends. We need social support. And when we don't have that connection, that's a stressor too. That's a big stressor. So thank goodness for technology. It's not quite the same as getting together in person, but however best people can create the community and the socializing that they need, that's important for a stress buffer.
Wonderful. Great answer. Okay, my last question is, what are some ways that males and females differ, particularly maybe in athletics, but because we all should be exercising, I kind of consider everyone an athlete to some extent, because that's what I want for everyone. I want everyone to be exercising, preferably strength training and sprinting, but however they're exercising and moving is great, whatever gets them up off the couch. But so what are some ways maybe that, like, different nutritional needs for males and females, or hormone related, anything like that? And what are, like, the second part of that question is, what are some food suggestions for athletes to feel great on game day? So first, like, males and females different, and maybe the second part for everybody to feel good on game or match or race day.
So when it comes to men and women, we obviously have our differences, and I think a lot of people confuse different with unequal. So we can be different and we can still work on equality at the same time. And I think our differences are what make us strong in some ways, and sometimes your strengths are also your weaknesses. So I think we should start with hormones. We as women obviously have cyclical changes with our hormones, and estrogen is a really important one to talk about, because we look at estrogen dominance these days, and we're absorbing and ingesting xenoestrogens, which further push our estrogen balance up in relation to.
And so for people that don't know what xenoestrogens are, those are chemicals, right, in our environment that mimic estrogens in our bodies, and they attach to the estrogen receptors. So our body thinks it's an estrogen, but it's actually just an environmental chemical.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah.
Just a poser. Yeah. So estrogen actually interferes with GABA. And so and GABA is your calming, grounding neurotransmitter. And so the more estrogen you have, with an inverse relationship to GABA, then you end up having less GABA. And so during the times of the month that you are having an estrogen spike, that's when women start to feel like more anxious, more irritable. And so that's something to keep in mind. That you might want to up your GABA during the times of the month that you tend to have higher estrogen. And then progesterone, when we talk about estrogen dominance, what we're saying is the estrogen is much higher in relation to the progesterone, which is your calming, happy. That's what makes, like, pregnant women have that glow. So women, and especially athletes that engage in a lot of endurance exercise, tend to get much lower on progesterone. There was a study that showed that women who did endurance running, particularly on asphalt, tended to get much lower on progesterone. So just being aware of how those hormones, how you're feeling, what time of the month it is, how those hormones affect your neurotransmitters, and then therefore your mood. So if you have a female who is maybe having an estrogen spike. She's low on GABA, and she tends to run a little low on serotonin anyway. Then you have like an irritable, kind of angry female, like a Karen. I mean, that's how it's Karen. That's
So
Karen.
they should increase, when you say they increase their GABA, are there certain foods or supplements that can do that for you?
Yes, I think that glutamine is a great one for GABA. I like valerian root, anywhere from 800 to 1500 milligrams of valerian. Make sure you take it at night, not while you're driving. Don't do that when you're drinking alcohol. Just use that alone. Valerian root increases GABA. Passion flower. So those are things that you can do. Obviously, exercise then helps reset and regulate the hormonal balance and the neurotransmitters that we're talking about right now. So those are
And
important.
male athletes don't necessarily have that same issue. Like so, female athletes are having a different challenge, I think, every month with their menstrual cycle, because they have this elaborate hormone shift, and then also I believe that women are more likely to be anemic due to blood loss. So I feel like there are really, some significant differences between the male and female athlete nutritional needs, which for some reason in this day and age is being ignored, that we're all the same, and we should be treated the same as far as what we need in our bodies.
Right. I think that's so important. And we're all individuals. We all have different genes. We all have different hormonal makeups. We have different environments and lifestyles. And so it makes all of us unique. I think the best way to really get that information is to do your own blood labs. Because if you don't measure it, then you're not going to know really how to change it. And so getting back to your question about eating on race day, iron deficiency, vitamin B deficiencies, both of which are nutrient deficiencies that are highly correlated with depression. And so that gets back to mood, not just performance, but also mood. And so I would recommend anybody who tends to run a little low on dopamine, start out with, for brain performance, start out with what we talked about with Charles Poliquin, which is the meat and nuts breakfast, because the meat improves your dopamine levels and your focus, and the nuts help increase the acetylcholine. And so you need the right brain function to perform well, whether it is at the office or on the track or on the slopes. If your brain's not working well, then you're not going to perform at your highest level.
Yes, that reminds me that I like to equate game day or race day with it doesn't have to necessarily just be a special occasion. Like you said, like you if you need to go to work or you're there for your family, you actually need to perform every day at your optimal best, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. It could be for not just for an athletic competition. So yeah, some meat and nuts breakfast to fire acetylcholine and dopamine. And what about social media and like screen time, decreasing dopamine? That's been a pretty major thing lately. So keeping the dopamine up is what you're saying will help you with your attitude. Oh, you're frozen there. Yep, that's okay. There you are.
You know why? My husband called.
Oh.
But I will call him back. So, yeah, so I think that one thing that you're hitting on is so important, because we're spending a lot of time on screens. I watched my own daughter do that during this whole COVID thing. It was killing me to watch her on an iPad or on a phone. But it was, we might be in the middle of a snow. She couldn't go outside. Everywhere was closed. She's not going to read a book all day. So a lot of people are spending time playing video games, like violent video games. And there was a huge spike, not only with alcohol use, but with porn sites on the internet. And so,
which is also gives you hits of dopamine that are like a drug. You need more and more to fulfill the happiness, right?
Right. And so that essentially burns out our dopamine receptors. And that's important to remember, because it worsens a problem that already existed with ADHD. I don't like the label, but with attention problems, you don't want to make those worse by burning out your dopamine receptors, because then you create a person who's needing more risk taking, more thrill seeking to kind of fill the dopamine need. And I think you can turn a lot of that around um, by not doing those things, by limiting screen time. And there's supplements you can use to increase dopamine levels. Not only eating a meat-based breakfast, by the way, in the absence of carbohydrates, because the tyrosine and the tryptophan
Right.
compete for entry through the blood-brain barrier. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
want to just have the meat. If your intention is to increase dopamine focus, have the meat and nuts alone, and limit the nuts that you're eating. So um, you can use ginseng, you can use L-tyrosine, a vitamin B complex. All those things can help support and increase dopamine. But we're seeing a lot of dopamine deficiencies these days, and I'm convinced
Yes.
that
I see a lot. I see that often. And
yeah.
it's a problem. Yeah. And it's like in your brain, it reacts the same way as, or like we'll say, you said no carbohydrates. So that's an important point because in addition to the alcohol depleting your dopamine and junk food, which were the two main things that the sales went up for COVID, right? Alcohol and junk food. So the carbohydrates in the junk food are depleting your dopamine because, right, you're getting this rush of serotonin and dopamine, all these feel good chemicals. Carbohydrates make you feel good, but then you get the crash after. So what the meat breakfast does, right, is stabilize that. So it helps fire your correct neurotransmitters without having that crash where you can't reuptake it, just like a drug or sugar, right?
Exactly.
Chemically.
Yeah, for sure. And people aren't even going out and buying, like, an organic cookie is still a cookie. But what most people end up buying is the really dirty stuff, like candies and sugary, gunky kind of stuff. It's got like the red food dye. Um, Beet sugar is one of the most highly sprayed crops out there. So you're not just ingesting the sugar, you're having food coloring that changes your blood flow in the brain. And that's why some kids who go to birthday parties and they ingest all this sugary food coloring, they run around and act like they're crazy for the next 2 or 3 hours. And then the next day they're like pooping blue because all the food coloring is coming out. So I remember those days. We would go to these birthday parties and I thought, this is like a diabetes party. I mean, I need an insulin pump
Yeah.
walking in here and looking at this crap that we're all spending money on to make ourselves sick. Not to
Mm-hmm.
mention the immune system hit. And no,
I think
nobody.
you and I are two peas in a pod with that because um, I have salmon on my birthday. My husband makes me a salmon cake and puts goat cheese for the frosting because I usually, well, one, I usually have a championship meet coming up around then, but I know that the sugar is going to be inflammatory. It's going to make me feel like crap. It's going to mess with my tendons and my gut. And I think, how is that a reward for me for my birthday? So I think that we have a perspective, you and I, that's not a common perspective on that. And I love that you share that perspective. Like that would be something I would be thinking if I walked into a typical birthday party with the grocery store cake with all the different bright colors, and they saturate the colors so much. So I used to own a gluten-free bakery, so we used all natural food coloring, but I know how much color it takes to get to that point as a baker. And so I know that it's saturated with so much artificial color and flavor, and that would be something I would think to myself too, is this is a diabetes party. Why are these kids eating this? So I
Right.
appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've seen your birthday cake before. It looks amazing. It really does. And I think the same way too. I feel the same way about Thanksgiving and Christmas. And no mom wants to be, the weird, mean mom who ruins the fun for everybody there. I'm not going to hand out pencils on Halloween or apples. I'll try to find there's always a healthy alternative. And maybe you kind of have to work to find it, but there's always something a better replacement. So my line of thought is find a replacement that doesn't make people sick or mad. You don't want to make them
I,
mad because you served, halibut at your birthday party for dessert. So replace the bad stuff, keep it fun. That's my goal. But like you, I'm not going to poison myself as a birthday gift.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that that is a form of self-care and self-love is to treat yourself that way. So if you are making decisions where you're consistently reaching for junk food or consistently reaching for alcohol, or you think that I'm going to have alcohol as a treat to reward myself because I did this and this, or I deserve a break, or I deserve this, like ask yourself why you think maybe that's what you deserve. You know, like where is that perspective coming from? Is it because someone told you that that should be the reward? Like because the marketing companies that sell alcohol and junk food told you you deserve this. This is what, you know, you should have. Or is it think about what your body really deserves, and that is to me self-care. You know, it deserves to be treated the best. And it's my passion to try to share information with everyone on ways to do that.
Absolutely. We share that passion because if you don't have your health, you really don't have anything. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You can't buy it back. So you can either get healthier and promote health and support that and longevity. I mean, I know I would really like to live till I'm 120, so at least. And the more you
And
can do.
longevity with quality of life, not just longevity for the sake of living long, which what we're doing, but our quality of life has recently not been as good. So we want to say, like you said, like a long but quality type of life.
Absolutely. We need to improve our health span, and it's 100% within our reach to do that. It's just all about the little choices that we make every day. And it's not easy. I mean, we know that sugar is so addictive. I mean, guilty as charged over here on occasion. I've had, cakes and cookies with icing. And to me, I may as well have crack sitting on my counter because after I have, one piece, I'm going to continue to walk back over there and do laps to get another little piece, another little piece. So I wouldn't even keep that in the house because it's so hard not to eat it. So I think that nourishing yourself rather than damaging yourself is important to keep in mind if you want to feel well and live well and have a long health span.
I love that. I love it. Well, that's all I have for you today. And I'm really excited that you took the time to join me. And I can't wait to see you again.
Oh, I
I
can't wait to see
got to
you
see you
either.
last year, but yeah,
Yeah,
so
well, when we're traveling again, like I have a list of places I'd like to go, and literally number one is Maui. So I can't wait to fly out there and see you again in person. And thank you so much for
me
having
too.
me here. It was awesome. And there was some stuff we didn't cover, and I'll try to post some things about those nutrients that I think are important
Okay.
that we didn't talk about. And I'll get that on my Instagram in the next few days. So
Awesome. You're amazing and your posts are amazing. So where can everybody find you?
you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Lisa Benton, or you can go to my website at the same address, drlisabenton.com. And that's where I am. I'm usually just posting information that I think might help people stay healthy, especially right now when resources are more limited and there's so many people who are having increased problems but less access to help. And just remember that the more you know, the more information you have that's good, solid information, the more you can just really empower yourself and the people around you to make better decisions and informed choices. So you're only as good as
It's
the information you have.
it's very well said, and we appreciate your information today. Thank you.
And I appreciate yours. I'll see you later. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.